Hey, what's up everybody? We are going to do a video on the brain today. And of course, the brain is that big major cranial portion of the central nervous system. It's our primary control and integration center, site of consciousness, emotions, memory, and just a ton more. Now, when we consider the brain, we got to realize that it has four main parts. There is the cerebrum, the big wrinkly part that mushrooms over and covers much of the other three parts. The diencephalon is completely enclosed by the cerebrum. Most of the brainstem is, and then a little bit of the cerebellum as well. And those are my four main parts of my brain. Here we see the brain situated in the head, and we can see the four main parts here, of course, as well. Here is the cerebrum. There is the cerebrum right there. And then we got the diencephalon right here. And then below that, we got our brainstem. Tried to make that a different color, did not succeed. And then we got our cerebellum is back here. So we can see all four of the brain parts in this nice mid-sagittal section. Now, the cerebrum is the biggest of those four parts. It makes up about 80% of your brain. And as we see here, it's nicely divided into a left and a right cerebral hemisphere. And that division is marked by a deep furrow called the longitudinal fissure. Now, the cerebrum is where we control our voluntary movements. It's the center of our sensory processing, memory, thought, judgment, and a whole lot more. If we slice a cerebrum like so, like a frontal section here, we are going to see there is an outer region which is made up of what's called gray matter. And this outer region is called the cerebral cortex. The word cortex literally means bark, like bark of a dog. And this is the outer layer of gray matter in our cerebrum. Gray matter, of course, is made out of neuron cell bodies, dendrites, as well as unmyelinated axons. Now, it's actually the cortex that we're doing those major cerebral functions: movement control, sensory processing, integration, thinking, all that good stuff is happening in our cerebral cortex, which is this outer layer of the cerebrum. Okay, not only is there an outer layer, but of course there is an inner part as well. The inner part is the cerebral white matter, and the cerebral white matter is made of myelinated axons, which are carrying signals connecting different parts of the cortex to each other, as well as connecting to other parts of the brain and the parts of the spinal cord too. So in each cerebral hemisphere, we got cortex on the outside, which is gray matter, and then cerebral white matter, which is deep. Now also notice that it's not entirely white matter in the deep portion. There are also regions of gray matter of varying sizes. This is a big one right here. These regions of gray matter are known as cerebral or basal nuclei. Recall that a nucleus in the brain is a collection of neuron cell bodies. A lot of the cerebral nuclei that we've got play roles in movement control. All right, so we got some basic cerebrum stuff. Let's do some more. Obviously, the cerebral cortex is not smooth, but it's got ridges. The ridges are known as gyri, singular is gyrus, and then there are grooves. These valleys are known as sulci, singular is sulcus. Having these gyri and sulci give me more surface area. More surface area means more neurons. more neurons makes me smarter. I also will have deeper grooves called fissures. We'll meet some fissures as well. We met the longitudinal fissure already. So another thing in my cerebral hemisphere is the fact that it's divided into 5 separate lobes. Anteriorly, there is a frontal lobe. Posteriorly, there is an occipital lobe. In between those two is a parietal lobe. Laterally, there is a temporal lobe. Note all of these match up with bone names in the same region. And if we pull the temporal lobe back, we see a hidden lobe known as the insula. So these are my 5 lobes of my cerebral hemisphere. Each hemisphere has one of these lobes. So let's go through these lobes. My frontal lobe is my anterior-most lobe. It is colored in blue right here. Of course, it is deep to the frontal bone, hence the name. My frontal lobe is the blue guy here. My parietal lobe is the yellow guy here. There is a sulcus between them whose name we've got to know. The sulcus is the central sulcus. Another sulcus whose name we have to know is the lateral sulcus. The lateral sulcus separates my frontal lobe from my temporal lobe. So we see the lateral sulcus on the side here, then the central sulcus running coronally on top. Now, what does my frontal lobe do? It's involved in controlling my movement, my behavior. It's where I make my decisions. It's where I have my thoughts, my intellect, my personality, my sense of humor, and just all sorts of things. Now we're going to do a couple different regions and a couple different major functions, but we're certainly not going to hit everything in the frontal lobe. We're going to do 4 regions, and we see them labeled on this nice colorful brain here. We've got a primary motor cortex right here. Then in front of it, we got the premotor cortex. Near that, we've got Broca's area. Then this big region in the front is known as the prefrontal cortex. So let's go through all 4 of these. Starting with the primary motor cortex rather. So the primary motor cortex is in this gyrus right here. Now this gyrus is right in front of a sulcus we met. This sulcus right here is the central sulcus. So the gyrus anterior to it is appropriately called the precentral gyrus. So the gyrus in front of the central sulcus is the precentral gyrus. And that's where I find my primary motor cortex. This is my main site of movement control. This is where I do my main movement control in this primary motor cortex. So when we're moving our body, we are using our primary motor cortex, which is in our precentral gyrus. So I'm talking about voluntary movements here. Voluntary movements, when we decide to do something, we're using this primary motor cortex. Now, the neurons in here are rather triangular in shape. So there's its cell body, there's the dendrites, and then there's the axon coming off of it. It would be a lot longer. And because the neurons are triangular in shape, they are called the pyramidal neurons. They're going to come down into the spinal cord. They're going to hit lower motor neurons, which are found in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. So the pyramidal neurons are where we initiate the signal that's going to ultimately cause contraction of skeletal muscle and movement of the body. Now this is a superior view of the brain right here. The precentral gyrus has been colored in blue, and we know the precentral gyrus functionally is the primary motor cortex. Now what they're doing is they're slicing the brain right along that line right there. They're slicing the brain right there, and then they're turning it so you can see this precentral gyrus. That's what we're looking at here. This is the cortex of the precentral gyrus. And note how different regions of this cortex here correspond to different portions of the body. So we got a region controlling, the ankle movement, a region controlling forearm movement, a region controlling tongue movement. Also note for me that the sizes of these different areas corresponding different body parts are different as well. Like we have a whole huge section controlled or devoted to hand and finger movement. Big section devoted to eye movement. Small section for trunk movement up here. So different regions of the body are going to have different amounts of cortex devoted to controlling their movement. And in fact, if we made a person with these same dimensions, he would look like this. And this cute little guy is called the motor homunculus. Homunculus means little man of and motor is movement, so he's the little man of movement. He's got huge hands, he's got huge lips and tongue, big eyes, because we devote so much cortical space to controlling the movement of those body parts. So that is our motor homunculus. Of course, I'm going to make you draw him on the exam. So make sure when you draw him, you give him big eyes, you give him big lips, a big tongue, and then give him a head, give him a body with some legs, feet are decently sized, give him some arms, and then give him some huge hands. This is a really good drawing. This is the kind of artwork I expect from you guys as well. I don't know why his pupils are so constricted, but that's okay. All right. So that's our motor homunculus, which is our representation of our primary motor cortex, which is where we voluntarily control movement, and anatomically is located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. All right, let's keep going. We got another view of the precentral gyrus up here. Again, note that we got corresponding body regions. The red lines represent the axons coming from the pyramidal motor neurons up here. All right, so these are upper motor neurons. We see them in the white matter of the frontal lobe here. They're coming down. They get into the midbrain. They get into the medulla oblongata. Then in the medulla oblongata, the clusters of motor neuron axons here are called the pyramids because of the way they sort of, they appear, they look pyramidal. And in the medulla, these axons do a switch. The ones on the left here switch to the right side. Any on the right would switch to the left side. And what that means is we have contralateral control. So our left precentral gyrus controls the right side of our body, and our right precentral gyrus controls the left side of our body. Now, the actual switching of sides has a name. It is called the decussation of the pyramids. The decussation of the pyramids. And remember, the pyramids are that collection of axons in the medulla oblongata. And the word decussation basically means to form an X. So if I did have the ones on the right side here, so the ones on the right would be coming down like so, and then they would also switch sides. And so in this switching, notice we are making an X, and forming an X means the word for that is a decussation. All right. Excellent. Let's keep on going. So here I see again my primary motor cortex and my precentral gyrus. This is where I would have pyramidal neurons that initiate my voluntary movements. The red lines represent their axons. These are upper motor neurons. They're coming down, 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 going into the brainstem. And then in the medulla oblongata, the collection of neurons on each side is called a pyramid. And we see the switching of sides. This is where most of the switching takes place. Not all of it though, but most of the switching takes place here. And this crossing over is called the decussation of the pyramids, and it is what's going to result in contralateral movement control. All right, so let's do some other frontal lobe structures, including the premotor cortex, which is anterior to the primary motor cortex. So the brighter red here is the precentral gyrus, which is the primary motor cortex. Then the deeper, darker red is the premotor cortex right in front of it. Now, my premotor cortex is involved in planning movements. So as I'm deciding I'm about to do a movement, my premotor cortex is involved in that planning, that beforehand decision making. It's also involved in performing what are called learned or patterned skills. Think about movements you can do that you don't need to think about what you're doing. Like, great example, tying your shoes. All right, tying your shoes, that's a learned or patterned skill. Your premotor cortex takes care of that. Think about typing, driving, playing a musical instrument, all sorts of sports activities. Those are learned or patterned skills, and that is the job of my premotor cortex. Nearby, working our way forward here, a little more lateral, this area is called the Broca's area or the motor speech area. Now, Broca's area is a little bit strange in that it's only on the left side. So we don't have a Broca's area on the right side. We just have it on the left. Now, with a name like motor speech area, you can kind of get the right idea that this is going to control movement for speech. And so we're talking about directing the activity of muscles of the tongue, the lips, and the pharynx. So, of course, when we're speaking, we're vibrating our vocal cords. That actually makes kind of a buzzing sound, and that buzzing sound is going to then be modified by your tongue, lips, soft palate, pharynx, and the muscle action there is controlled by Broca's area. The right-hand side does not have this, has like an analogous region, but is not really controlling the movement. It's more involved in like processing as opposed to movement control. Sometimes in left-handed people, the siding, the lateralization here is switched, but not always. Anyhow, let's go on to our final part of our frontal lobe that we're going to do. And again, bear in mind, we're not doing everything in the frontal lobe here. The final part is the prefrontal cortex, which is this anterior part, this pink part right here of my frontal lobe. My prefrontal cortex is involved in a whole bunch of functions. We're talking thinking, personality, behavior control, conscience, intuition, empathy, sense of humor, all sorts of different things. Now, this is actually the last part of the cerebrum to finish properly developing. So we talked about how different bones develop at different rates different bones develop at different rates. Same thing with the brain. It's not until your mid to late 20s, if we're going to assign an age, it's somewhere in your mid to late 20s that your prefrontal cortex is finally developed. Okay. I'm going to skip over this guy here, although we did talk about him during the actual lecture, but I'm going to skip over him because I want to jump directly into our next lobe. And our next lobe is the parietal lobe. So posterior to the frontal lobe, thus posterior to the central sulcus. And I see my central sulcus right here. And then superior to that lateral sulcus, which we've pulled open here. That is my parietal lobe, of course protected by that parietal bone. So there's two parts of my parietal lobe that I want to look at. They are my primary somatosensory cortex and then my somatosensory association area. Now, my primary somatosensory cortex is found in my postcentral gyrus. So remember, we had a central sulcus. This is my central sulcus right here, dividing my frontal and my parietal lobes. In front of it, we had a precentral gyrus, which controlled movement. Then behind it, we've got the postcentral gyrus. And my postcentral gyrus is my primary, my main somatosensory cortex. Somatosensory, well, sensory means we're receiving information, we're sensing, obviously. Somato refers to the body. So we got body sensations coming into the parietal lobe. And the two major body sensations are touch and proprioception. Remember, of course, we know what touch is already, the pressure we feel of things upon our skin, and there are sensory receptors for light touch and deep touch and all sorts of different things. And they're sending information to this primary somatosensory cortex. We also have proprioceptors in our joints and muscles and tendons that are going to let me know about my limb position, my joint position. This sense of body awareness is called proprioception. And my proprioceptors are also sending signals up to my primary somatosensory cortex. Now, just like we had that switching of sides for movement control, we've got a similar thing going on here. Again, it is contralateral. So I am aware of my left side of my body in my right cerebral hemisphere. So my right postcentral gyrus is getting information from my left side of my body, and my left postcentral gyrus is getting information from my right side of my body. Now, again, similar to the motor situation, if we look at the postcentral gyrus and we look at the cortex right there, we're noticing that different cortical regions here correspond to different parts of the body. And we're also going to notice it is not an equal representation. Areas that have a greater degree of sensitivity or a greater number of joints and muscles and therefore proprioception are going to be more heavily represented. Like, look how much we devote to the fingers and the hand, right? Look how much we devote to the lips and our gums and teeth and tongue here, because these are all very sensitive areas. And similarly to what we did before, we can make a dude with these representations. This guy is called the somatosensory homunculus. Notice he's similar to the motor one, although his eyes are a lot smaller. His feet are bigger, genitals are bigger. But other than that, he's fairly similar. Big hands, big lips, big tongue. Big ears as well. But small eyes. So not really a lot of sense of touch for our eyes, right? Okay, excellent work. Let's keep going. There is also a somatosensory association area in the posterior parietal lobe. And this is where we're figuring stuff out about somatosensations, like recognizing what's going on with our sense of touch and proprioception, recognizing it, figuring out what that means, remembering it. So like if you touch something and you remember what it felt like touching, fur of a dog, texture of sandpaper, and you can realize what these things are, and you can remember other instances where you've touched these sorts of things or similar ones. This is happening in my somatosensory association area. We're going to see this with a bunch of senses where we have a primary area where the senses are first going to, and then an association area where we're figuring things out. All right, fantastic. Let's jump to the temporal lobe. I think we'll do the temporal lobe, then maybe we'll call it quits for this first brain video. The temporal lobe is inferior to that lateral sulcus. The lateral sulcus was pulled open here. We see the temporal lobe nicely right here, corresponding to the temporal bone. Now we're going to go over 4 different things in the temporal lobe. A primary auditory cortex, which you can probably already guess, that's where sound information first goes. Then we got an auditory association area, that's where we figure out and analyze sound information. There's a primary olfactory cortex, which is where smells are going. Then something called Wernicke's area that we'll hit as well. So my primary auditory cortex is going to be found in a not very surprising place. It's sort of where we expect it, in the middle of the temporal lobe right there, corresponding to structures in the ear, of course. And when sound waves enter our ear canal, shake our eardrum, which shakes our malleus, our incus, and our stapes, that then shakes this guy here called the cochlea, and depending on the sound waves, the shaking is different, and signals are developed in the auditory nerve, which is sent eventually to the primary auditory cortex. Although it is contralateral, so my right ear is sending signals to my left temporal lobe, my left ear sending signals to my right temporal lobe. Nearby, I've got my auditory association area, sort of like in front and beneath my major auditory cortex there. And that association area is where I'm interpreting sound and speech, integrating them with other senses, and starting to determine what exactly I'm hearing. Now, as far as speech goes, there's a special area called Wernicke's area, which is just posterior to the primary auditory cortex, and it kind of like overlaps with the parietal lobe as well. And Wernicke's area is involved in comprehending both written and spoken language. This is where I understand speech. Now remember, I had Broca's area earlier. Broca's area was where I controlled my muscles of speech, but Wernicke's area is where I am going to understand and figure out exactly what I'm hearing. And also, kind of surprisingly, what I'm writing. Now, similar, or what I'm reading rather than what I'm writing, similar to Broca's area, I generally find Wernicke's area just on the left hemisphere and not on the right. All right, now this will probably be our final slide today because we're approaching half an hour here. one final thing I got to consider is that things can go wrong with both Broca's and Wernicke's area. And when things go wrong in these places, that is called an aphasia, which is a disorder in the comprehension or expression of language. Broca's aphasia rather is an expressive aphasia, where I can understand speech because my Wernicke's is still working, but I have a hard time making sentences. Wernicke's area is a receptive Wernicke's aphasia, sorry, I keep doing that, is a receptive aphasia where it's harder for me to understand speech. And because of that, even when I'm making up my own sentences, they're not always correct. It's like a word salad with made up words and words that don't belong. So I can make the words, but like putting them in a correct comprehensive order is very difficult. Okay, with that, let's call it quits on brain video number 1. We'll finish up. Actually, we should finish up. Should we finish up right here? Yeah, let's do this last little bit because we still got a little bit of the temporal lobe. Tucked inside the temporal lobe is the primary olfactory cortex. So like we're pulling open the lateral sulcus there and we see that primary olfactory cortex. And of course, that is involved in the sensation of smells. It is weird in that it is ipsilateral. So everything else that we've encountered and will encounter for the most part is going to be contralateral. Smelling is ipsilateral. So right side of my nasal cavity goes to my right temporal lobe. Left side of my nasal cavity goes to my left temporal lobe. So no switching of sides here. And now with that last little bit that I just wanted to get in there, we will call it quits. We'll pick up next time. We'll knock out the occipital lobe, the insula, and then we'll take care of the diencephalon, the brainstem, cerebellum, all that good stuff. All right, see you later. Bye.